Greetings, carbon-based life forms. All life on this planet is carbon-based. Yet many in Washington claim carbon is a pollutant. Consider that. Are they a pollutant? I don't think I am. When you breathe, you increase the carbon dioxide concentration of the air you use by about 100 times, inhaling about 4 parts per 10,000 carbon dioxide to air, and exhaling about 400 parts. Yet the EPA says carbon dioxide endangers human health and human welfare. Think of it. Human breathing endangers human health. That's an example of the thinking that is taking place in Washington today. And it is very unfortunate. The United States government has now spent something in the order of $40 billion on what it calls climate science since fiscal year 1992. This is the sum total of what we have. It's produced by using atmospheric data and produced by the University of Alabama, Huntsville. If you see, this red line is what our grand climate models predict will happen. This is what is happening based upon observations. This again is atmospheric warming or pretended warming, and what is actually occurring. The atmospheric observations are the best observations of temperature we have globally, by far the most comprehensive ever compiled. They also are calculated by 2 separate and competing entities, and yet the entities come quite close to one another in what they predict. Further, what they find. Further, the atmospheric temperatures as measured by satellites are counterchecked against 4 different sets of atmospheric temperatures measured from weather balloons, and they closely agree. There is a great difference between what the models predict and what we are observing. Now, who in this room would trust a broker who continues to project this and performs that way? Would you put your money into that broker's account for him to handle? I don't think many people would. Yet our government is doing precisely that. Today, this fear of carbon dioxide, which I have a small handout on each table, is driving a new disease in Washington. It is selective memory loss. And this disease is manifested by a chronic symptom called selective ignorance. We have 13 government entities that have boldly demonstrated they are hurting from selective ignorance. And they came out with a document entitled Climate and Health Assessment. It was turned for public comment. They didn't want it quoted or what have you. This follows an email that Lisa Jackson received back in 2009 saying, don't stress global warming science because people are not responding and the science is failing. Stress public health. And that is what the government started doing very heavily this year. The executive summary of this grand report states, changes in climate, specifically rising temperatures, which are not occurring, increasing precipitation, we're not seeing it, and increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide, which is occurring, there's no question about it, are expected to contribute to increasing levels of some airborne allergens, associated increases in asthma episodes, and other allergenic illnesses compared to a future without climate change. Now, this is really interesting. The President of the United States said that his daughter suffers from allergies and, asthma, and attributed it to climate change. That's a sad episode. Asthma is a problem. It's a real problem. We have increasing diagnosis of asthma, both in the United States and the UK. No one really understands the disease. It is a disease that we should understand, and we should donate resources to it. But to fight asthma by fighting climate change or controlling carbon dioxide emissions is a wrong direction for any public health measure. Another vector-borne disease that is emphasized in this new report is Lyme disease. Now, Lyme disease has become significant in the US. A number of people suffer from it. There's no question there is an issue. It is borne by a tick. The tick is found in these regions. This is straight from the report I just mentioned. What you'll notice is it's found in the upper Northeast, very heavily. Well, the upper Northeast is not particularly a problem for global warming. It's a cold area, and why should Lyme disease be appearing there as a start? We also find it in the southeast. We have a variant of it in the Pacific coast of the tick. Well, the tick in question is called a deer tick. That's the popular name. The report doesn't mention it's called a deer tick. And if we look at some records, there are no systematic records, but if we look at some records, we'll see that the estimates for the deer population in the United States, particularly in the east, was about 500,000 deer in the entire country. Now the estimates are about 20 million. We have a massive increase in deer population, particularly in suburban areas in the Northeast and the East. And somehow or another, this report that is concerned about the effects of climate change ignores the simple fact that a deer tick is the major cause or spreader of the disease, major vector. We also can look a little further. Here's the reported cases of Lyme disease in 2013. Notice it's all concentrated here. Not all, but also in the upper Midwest. Very little in the Southeast where it's warmer. This is not a temperature-related disease, not directly at least. Also, we have this report from the Yale Journal of Biology and Medicine that states that the disease itself, what we call Lyme disease, was discovered in Sweden in 1909. Now, Sweden is roughly north of the 55th parallel, north latitude. You're halfway up north in Manitoba to get that high. Again, why would anyone describe this as a global warming caused disease or related disease is beyond me. Another now common disease that is attributed to climate change and global warming is malaria. Well, this is the estimate of malaria in 1882, long before global warming was an issue. This is in the United States. You'll notice that the Appalachian Mountain chain does not have any malaria, but the coastal areas and the Midwest has a massive amount, Missouri Basin. Also the Imperial Valley in California and up here in the valley in Oregon. Again, this is not a heat-related disease. You have it in the northern Midwest. It is more a disease related to standing water. One of the great success stories in American medicine was confronting such infectious diseases. This one is borne by mosquitoes, and it was a marvelous success. We can see its remarkable disappearance from the United States. These are reported by the U.S. Health Service at the time. The selective ignorance of our government reports are ignoring this enormous success. And I point to this period of 1934 because that was before the use of DDT for insect control. DDT finally wiped out malaria in the U.S. It was not used for insect control really until after World War II, and it was a tremendous benefit to the GIs who took baths or showers in DDT. And by the 1950s, the British colonial doctors had discovered the best way to control malaria in tropical countries was by the indoor spraying of huts with DDT. It could be done about twice a year. It will control the mosquitoes and the spread of DDT. The other kind of funny thing about this report is it ignores that malaria has been found north of the Arctic Circle. It was endemic in Finland, which has a latitude of north of 60 degrees north, and it was found in locations in Finland north of the Arctic Circle. Again, it thrives in tropical climates, but it's not restricted to tropical climates. Here we see the decline in malaria in the latter part of from 1920 to 1946. This is a logarithmic scale, but you can see the dramatic decline in malaria incidence. This is extremely valuable use of America's health resources. And it was a great benefit to many Americans who did not get malaria, because if it didn't, it often didn't kill people, but it caused a disease that would reoccur throughout adulthood that could be quite disabling. Now, in contradicting the U.S. government report, we had a report in Lancet on health and climate. This is the British medical journal. And it reported on a study that was billed as the most comprehensive health study on between temperature extremes and human mortality ever compiled. As you can see, according to the studies, all those studies have provided estimates in the past, but no one has done it comprehensively. The other thing is they used actual mortality rates, death certificates, evidence of death rather than computer estimates of deaths or what caused. And it was compiled largely in temperate countries where most people live. And as you can see here, in the conclusion, their findings are that far more deaths occur during cold periods than during warm periods. The ratio is around 20 to 1, almost 20 to 1. And what's also interesting, it's not the extreme cold, it is a long cold period that kills. And the same thing with extreme heat. Extreme heat would be short, where the longer heat period would kill more people. But cold is far more deadly for humans than heat. And hey, we're a tropical species. That's not surprising. Another issue that was brought up in the Lancet was that increasing carbon dioxide, not in Lancet, I'm sorry, in the US report, was increasing carbon dioxide and increasing temperatures will hurt agricultural production in the US. I have there, you can't see it, a very thick document, about this thick, that cites over several thousand studies showing increasing carbon dioxide is a great benefit to agriculture. Food production increases, it doesn't decrease. And nutrient value does not decline, or at least significantly. One of the ideas in the US government report was that with greater growth, you'd have a decrease in nutrients. Well, one could argue with the use of fertilizer, and that was argued, you'd have a decrease in nutrients in the food produced. But it's the abundance of food that is the important part. Now, what are these 13 government entities that have decided on really selective ignorance? They ignore important science that contradicts their views. Here they are. Department of Agriculture. One would think that the Department of Agriculture would be the first to stand up and say carbon dioxide is a great benefit to agriculture. It doesn't. The Department of Defense. That was a little unexpected unless you've been following it. The Department of Energy. It has energy programs designed to throttle the use of fossil fuels and encourage the use of unreliable wind and solar. We have the Department of State. That's nice. EPA, well, Jay Lear expressed his views about EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and unfortunately, it probably has gone too far. It has definitely gone too far, and it should be throttled back. Then we have NASA. What is it doing, signing a report like this? The National Science Foundation. It's been a worry for some time. Smithsonian Institution. What? It demonstrates that type of ignorance. And U.S. Agency for International Development. USAID was very important in trying to stomp out the use of DDT, which resulted in large increases in worldwide mortality from malaria. And so that's not a big surprise. Anyway, just remember when you see reports like this, that humanity came on this planet, as we know it, Homo sapiens, about 200,000 years ago. It evolved over a period of considerable climate change. As Dr. Singer said, there was extreme cold periods interrupted by brief warm periods. It evolved over a period, humanity, Homo sapiens, evolved over a period of about 6 million years. Well, we have evidence, physical evidence, taken from sea sediments off the coast of China, showing that climate change has been around for about 1.5 billion years, if not longer. So what caused climate change if it was not humanity? Washington doesn't care to find an answer. Thank you.
Some years ago, the debate over DDT and malaria and so forth has been going on for 50 years, since Silent Spring and all that. I remember seeing some program many years ago. Some people were protesting the ban of DDT, and their method of calling attention to this was to take a daily dose, to actually consume it. Are you aware of that story? Can you comment on the toxicity of DDT to humans?
DDT was banned by William Ruckelshaus when he became the first administrator of the EPA. There was no scientific evidence for banning it. And what he supposedly, I have not seen this quote, but he said it was for political reasons. He said later, it was for political reasons, not scientific ones. The Alan Carlin, who's a 35-year-plus veteran of the EPA, addresses this in part in his book and points out that the EPA did research on the toxicity of DDT, and was unable to come to any clear conclusions. From what we can tell, it is generally benign to humanity. It certainly is effective in killing certain types of insects.
I'd like to call attention, you mentioned President Obama's daughter. She was 4 years old 12 years ago and had an asthma attack, was taken to the emergency room of a hospital, I believe, in Chicago. He was a very heavy smoker then, and smoking is the number one cause of asthma attacks.
Thank you.
I have a statement and a question. I remember growing up in Romania, and we sprayed with DDT. We had this pump, pretty much everything we grew in the garden. And it had a particular odor, but it was the only thing that controlled the Colorado beetle, which somehow got to our country. But I don't remember, obviously I'm not a scientist, but I don't remember any increase in cancer rates or deaths at the time. That's just my statement. My question is, once DDT was banned, obviously malaria came back, and I know that Bill Gates, his foundation, is spending quite a bit of money sending tents to Africa to prevent malaria. Had we not banned DDT, is it possible that eventually the mosquitoes would have grown immunity to the chemical?
There are some reports that some species of mosquitoes were gaining immunity to the chemical, but those have not been rigorously confirmed. And certainly indoor use, again, spraying the inside of huts with DDT was very effective while it was being done. And DDT works as not only as an insecticide, but also works as an insect repellent. And consequently, insects are less inclined to go into a hut that has been sprayed. But the one thing you'll notice about a mosquito is when it takes what is called a blood meal, I find that funny, it really swells in size significantly, and it cannot fly very far. We found that out, or the U.S. military found that out fighting yellow fever in the tropics during the building of the Panama Canal. So the mosquito will land, it's a female mosquito, will land someplace close by. If it lands in a concentration of DDT, it's gone. And you don't have the organisms, the problem with the microbes developing, maturing, and allowing the spread of of malaria. There's, again, no rigorous studies supporting the idea that mosquitoes were becoming immune. There were suggestions, but there's a lot of loose suggestions hanging around. And it certainly was very effective. Yes?
Yeah, I saw a movie about the DDT called 30 Million and Counting, and something like 30 million Africans, mostly babies and children, have died from malaria because of banning DDT. But about the smoking thing there, in the last 50 years, smoking has been cut by half, and indoor exposure has been cut by about 80 to 90%, and asthma is becoming epidemic. I read an interesting study about asthma, the two control group and a group of asthmatics. They had them inhale substances that they said they were going to test what concentrations of air pollution would start wheezing. And the asthmatics, they told them that these substances have been shown to trigger your attacks. And the control group, they told, were these substances might be irritating and make it difficult to breathe. Interestingly, they had them all inhale saline solution, and 35% of the asthmatics had physiological reactions. 30% of them went into full-blown asthma attacks. And then they told them they were going to give, oh, there were no reactions in the control group. Of course, you know, saline solution is not going to cause anyone breathing difficulty. Apparently, they had physiological reactions based on a suggestion, a nocebo effect, as opposed to the placebo effect. You know, there are people getting sick and dying because they've been conned. And then they gave them another, they told them they were going to give them a bronchodilator to fix their breathing difficulty, and they gave them saline solution again, and they all got better. It seems that there is a large component of emotional or stress-related issues, which might, you know, is my theory as to why I personally have met several people that tell me when they started smoking, their asthma went away.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of bad statistical studies, as William Briggs and others have pointed out. And unfortunately, particularly when it comes to tobacco and secondhand smoke, the EPA just totally trashed the standards. There were great standards established when people like Sir Bradford Hill and others put a very strong statistical link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. That was rigorous statistics, but that's been totally trashed. Yes.
Can you possibly comment on the evident resurgence of bed bugs in the U.S. versus the DDT ban?
Let me put it this way. I would feel more comfortable sleeping in a bed with DDT than one with bed bugs.
Hey, Ken. A couple quick comments on the air pollution and asthma. It's been very interesting how the air pollution has been going down while asthma is going up. So obviously what we have to do is increase, if we want to improve the asthma rates, reduce the asthma rates, we need to increase the air pollution rates.
Yeah, that would be one solution.
So as to DDT, it is the most single powerful insect repellent, especially mosquito repellent, ever developed. It keeps about 80% of the mosquitoes from going into these huts that have had their walls sprayed. So if they're sprayed, 20% of the mosquitoes still come in, but most of them get disoriented and irritated. They leave without biting. If they do bite, or if they land on the walls, they die, as you pointed out. So you get about an 80% reduction in malaria simply by spraying with the repellent DDT. And then they can bring in the ACT drugs, the ones that are based on the Chinese drugs from years ago, and treat a much lower percentage of people who are getting malaria still, and almost knock out 95% of the malaria in an area. So I think that's a really compelling reason for bringing the DDT back on a wider spread basis. But because the environmentalists are opposed to it, what they're doing is keeping people from getting exposed to malaria and ensuring that still about 1 million of them die every year from malaria. To keep them from getting exposed to DDT, I mean, and end up killing them from malaria.
Good comments, Paul. One thing I didn't mention, and it became part of government policy to try to ban DDT worldwide. So our policy led to the deaths of tens of millions of people and the preventable illnesses of hundreds of millions more, because for many who survived, it's a reoccurring disease that can be debilitating. Yes, sir.
I thought it might be of value to mention that Dixie Lee Ray, former governor of the state of Washington and also chairman of the AEC, Atomic Energy Commission, wrote 2 books several years ago. One was called Environmental Overkill. One was called Trashing the Planet. I don't know if they're still in print. But in each book, she devoted a chapter decimating the Rachel Carson fiction, I guess, for lack of a better term, about the dangers of using DDT. I'm not sure, are you aware of those two books?
I'm aware of them. I have not read them.
Yes. Well, and anybody wants to read up, you know, she covers that only in one chapter. There are other, but it's good reads. They're good
Thank you.
reads.
Yes, sir.
I think I'd like to share a quote. I think it was Milton Friedman said that when bureaucracy takes over any enterprise, useful work decreases and useless work increases. And I think what we're talking about more in terms of government is actually bureaucratic, the problem with bureaucracy, and that it almost seems right to define bureaucracy as a solution in search of a problem in the way you've encapsulated this. But I think very much from a high altitude view, and maybe getting too high in the altitude, I'm thinking that we're witnessing something in our country. This is a lot like Lysenkoism, and I would say that maybe Al Gore is our Lysenko, and the government has grabbed onto this because it is in their interest, in their conflict of interest, because it helps their power and increases their power. But I don't want to go on and on. I wanted to share an experience I had. I went to a mathematics conference in San Diego because I was very interested in many of the presentations that were going to go on there, and I met Ken Golden, who was touted as the foremost authority on the mathematics of ice. And I listened to a very erudite 2-hour presentation with a lot of videos of calving ice. Very dramatic, very moving videos of these huge calvings of ice in the Antarctic. And of course, during the whole 2 hours, he never mentioned something that I was quite certain existed, is that was the Antarctica's ice is growing profoundly on the other side. And you know, when the time for questions came up, I asked him in front of everybody, on the scale of, you know, this is meaningless and we don't need to worry about it, and run for your lives, the ice is melting, where do you fall in that scale? And of course, a very political answer for him was right in the middle.
On the Antarctic ridge, the mountain ridge running
Yeah,
through
and of course
Antarctica.
nothing was mentioned about the volcanoes, and of course there are volcanoes underneath, I mean everywhere in the center of the earth that is bringing heat to the surface and, you know, causing things like this. But I asked him in person afterwards why he did not mention the incredible growth of ice on the other side, and his answer to me was, well, it's complicated. But just to share the experience of somebody who's touted as the foremost authority, not mentioning some very important bits of evidence that are contrary to, I mean, this whole collective consciousness of we're saving the world and we want to worship these people that are doing this because they are our new idols of how we need to be protected from this evil that is harming our loving planet. And the people that got up and talked were really saying wonderful things about how he's saving us and saving the planet, but not too many challenging questions. But I just thought I'd share that. Thank you.
Thank you. Recently in Antarctica, there were actual measurements taken in West Antarctica of the heat flow from geothermal sources below the West Antarctic ice sheet. And it was significant. Now, how extensive they are, the research did not get into it, but it's certainly demonstrating that geothermal sources are an important source of the heat for the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet, not carbon dioxide. Thank you.